guys, it's been a while and it's good to be back. I'm recording this new episode on a rainy night in San Francisco, and although it's a Friday night and I typically hear people singing, shouting, or laughing, cars honking, tonight it's extremely quiet. I guess it must be due to the lockdown and the rain, but today I've got an exciting book for you guys that I quite enjoyed reading, and this book is called The Third Door. The wild quest to uncover how the world's most successful people launch their careers by Alex Banayan. Alex dropped out of college to hunt down and ask legends like Bill Gates, Steven Spielberg, Maya Angelou, and many more on how they accomplished their dreams so he could share it with the world. And his book quickly became a bestseller, and he was invited to speak at big companies such as Apple, IBM, Harvard, Dell, and so on. So if you'd like to learn more about his jaw-dropping journey to track down these influential people and getting them to agree to do the interview all from scratch when he was just 19 years old, keep on listening. Alright guys, so let's start with the title of the book. What is he referring to as the third door, you might be wondering? Well, by his definition, life, business, success, it's all just like a nightclub, and there are always three ways in. There's the first door, which is the main entrance where the line curves around the block where 99% of people wait around hoping to get in. And there's a second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires, celebrities, and the people born into it slips through. But what no one tells you about is that there's always a third door, which is the entrance where you have to jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, sneak through the kitchen. There's always a way. So he believes that whether it's how Bill Gates sold his first piece of software or how Steven Spielberg became the youngest studio director in Hollywood history, they all took the third door. So let me give you a little bit of background information on Alex. So he comes from a Jewish family, and his family pressured him into becoming a doctor ever since he was born. Freshman year at USC, when he was 18 years old, Alex declared his major as pre-med, and he was staring at his biology books, and he felt like they were sucking the life out of him. And he realized he's not on his path, but he's on a path that somebody else placed him on. So he started questioning what he really wanted to do with his life. So he went to the library to read how the most influential people found their path and how they started out. But he quickly noticed that there wasn't a single book that focused on the stage of life he was in, that no book held the answers of what their first steps were. So then he got the idea of writing that book himself. This chapter definitely resonated with me, as in Asian culture, parents want you to become a doctor or a lawyer as well. And I don't blame them, as they made so many sacrifices to move to the US and to have their kids get a better education. So Alex making this tough decision was the hardest part of his journey. And I also had to do the same thing, as my mom is a doctor, and I just naturally thought that was my path, and I never questioned it. And she wanted me to follow her legacy too. But once I started college, I felt lost. I realized I didn't really want to become a doctor. I wasn't passionate enough to spend 10 to 15 years of my life in school and in so much debt. And Alex didn't have a good relationship with his whole family for the duration of writing this book, which was about 7 years. And that was very courageous of him. And in one of his interviews, he explains the difference between courage and fearlessness. And he says that Fearlessness is jumping off of the cliff without thinking, but courage is acknowledging your fear, analyzing the consequences, and deciding you still care so much about it, you're going to take one step forward anyway. And that's what Alex did. So after figuring out his mission, he was trying to come up with a way to fund his mission. So he decided to go on a show called The Price is Right. He never saw a single episode of the show, and it was in 2 days. So he had no choice but to give it all he got. And he really did. He tried to stand out in the crowd and make an impression, ask the audience how the show works, if they had any tips. And what's wild is that it all worked, and he won the final prize, a sailboat, retailed at $31,000, and he sold these later for $16,000, and that's how he came up with the fund for his quest. So this is not something anybody can pull off. So the fact that he accomplished this made me, as the reader, realize his potential and what he's capable of if he sets his mind into something. So the first key idea that Alex introduced in his book was, being persistent is important, but there's the right way to be persistent. And he learned that lesson by trying to score an interview with Tim Ferriss. So after reading Tim Ferriss's popular book, The 4-Hour Workweek, Alex became obsessed with meeting the author. So after a conference where Tim was speaking, Alex tried to intercept with Tim as he came off stage, and they exchanged a few words, and Tim seemed to be interested in his mission and said he'd get in touch. But some time passed and there was no contact from Tim Ferriss. So Alex started emailing his assistant, and he knew the importance of persistence. So even though he wasn't receiving a reply, and after the assistant rejected a request, Alex sent in total 31 emails, and one of which he claimed that a 1-hour interview with him, a college student, would be one of the best investments that Tim Ferriss, a multi-million-dollar author, would ever make. So then one day, out of the blue, Tim agreed to talk to him, and he thought, oh yeah, persistence works. But when they met, Tim started off with a different story about persistence. Tim Ferriss got his first break after he tried to build a relationship with a certain startup CEO. And he had emailed the CEO asking for a job and was turned down 12 times. Eventually, Tim Ferriss emailed to say he'd be in the CEO's neighborhood the following week. A total lie, and that it would be great to stop by. So the CEO agreed to see him. So then Ferriss jumped on a plane from New York to San Francisco to casually meet him. And that's how he got his first job. But in telling the story to Alex, Tim Ferriss wanted to be clear about one point. There is a difference between being persistent and being a hassle. And Tim never was rude. But while he was persistent, he got the balance right. He didn't email 10 times a week. And he told Alex not to say things like, thanks in advance, because it sounds rude and entitled. Instead, say something like, I totally understand if you don't have time to respond. So months later, when reading through old emails, the author realized that Tim Ferriss had been trying to save him from himself. Only then did he understand how much he had to learn. So here actually I found a very helpful tip for sending out an email to someone you'd like to meet or borrow their time. So I will quickly go over the template, which might help you guys as well. So the template starts with, Dear so-and-so, I know you're really busy and that you get a lot of emails, so this will only take 60 seconds to read. And in the next paragraph, you will say who you are, add 1 or 2 lines to establish your credibility. And in the next paragraph, you ask your very specific question. And the next paragraph, you say, I totally understand if you're too busy to respond, but even a 1 or 2 line reply would really make my day. All the best, and you sign your name. So you can simply Google this template, just put something like Tim Ferriss template third door and you'll come across it. But from this template, what I understood was oftentimes we don't make our ask clear enough, or the recipient has to read 5 paragraphs to find out what the request is. I like this template because it's concise and to the point. So next time you email someone to network or to be your mentor, try this template. Okay, so then his journey continues from then on. He talks about having an inside man really helps to network with people. So he had a contact at Microsoft, and the contact helped him get an interview with Chi Lu, who is the president at Microsoft. So at the time, Alex had no idea who he was, but any interview was good news to him, so he agreed to do that. And this was actually my favorite interview in the whole book. Chi Lu's story is truly inspiring, as he grew up in the poor village in China. And as a child, he wanted to be a builder, but wasn't strong enough. So he focused on his schoolwork and ended up studying computer science. And that's when he realized that one thing in life is constant. Whether you're rich or poor, you only have 24 hours in a day. That led him to think that sleeping less could give him a competitive advantage over his peers. So he started to engineer his sleep pattern, cutting out 1 hour, then another, and at one point he slept just 1 hour at night, forcing himself back to consciousness with an ice-cold shower. But this was too much to keep up. Eventually, he settled on a sustainable 4 hours at night, and he stuck to that ever since. So by reducing his sleep and working extra hard, Chi Lu managed to publish 5 research papers. And early in his academic career, a visiting professor from Carnegie Mellon came to give a talk on the same topic. And Lu made some perceptive observations and impressed the professor with his research. And the professor suggested that Lu should apply to study in the USA. And the application fee would be $60. But Chi Lu didn't have that kind of money. So the professor offered to pay for him. So Chi Lu applied to Carnegie Mellon. He got a full ride scholarship. So this part kind of reminded me of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, in the sense that when an opportunity presents itself, only people who are prepared will seize those opportunities. This encounter might feel a little lucky, but it was only by carving out an extra few hours in a day that Chi Lu had been able to deliver his research papers, and he was very knowledgeable in the topic that the Carnegie Mellon professor was giving the lecture on. So if he wasn't prepared, the Carnegie Mellon professor wouldn't have invited him to apply to Carnegie Mellon, or wouldn't have offered to pay the $60 application fee if he didn't see any potential in him. But Chi Lu prepared for this moment, and he was ready to seize this opportunity. So throughout this book, Alex mentions the support of his friends, because this book took him 7 years to write, and through all the ups and downs, Alex's friends truly stood by him, cheered him on, went to lectures or events with him to support his mission. And Alex states that in life, there are friends, there are best friends, and there are the best friends who carry your dad's casket. So that's what happened when Alex lost his dad to pancreatic cancer. His friends were carrying his dad's casket and were truly there for him. He firmly believes that the quality of a relationship or friendship is directly correlated with the ability to have an uncomfortable conversation. One thing that Alex does with his friends is that every few months they sit together and share with each other one thing that they're doing really well and one thing they could improve on. So what's funny is that when I was in 5th or 6th grade, I did the exact same thing with my friends. And to this day, I believe that's what shaped me to be a better human being. Because we were constantly evolving and improving, and the feedbacks were invaluable. And I especially believe that in 5th or 6th grade, that's when you kind of explore who you are and your personality traits. So to work on them, to better them, and try to be the best version of yourself is truly amazing now that I think about it. I no longer have these type of discussions with my friends, but this was a good reminder to keep doing that, because I always welcome constructive criticism and feedback from others, and this method kind of creates a platform for us, and it's a very effective way. So you can try this method with your friends as well. So after his initial success in talking to Qi Lu and Tim Ferriss, Alex hit a brick wall because Qi Lu passed on his request for him to interview Bill Gates. But Bill Gates' office refused to do that unless he had a publishing deal. So after going through numerous ups and downs, Alex finally secures a book deal and eventually persuades Bill Gates' office to set up an interview. And here I found an interesting story about Bill Gates. To us, or at least to me, Bill Gates is this fearless, smart man. But I guess even the person destined to be the world's richest man suffered from paralyzing fear as well. So when he was just 19 years old, him and his partner Paul Allen heard that computer company MITS had released the first mini computer onto the market, and Gates saw an opportunity. So the two of them wrote to MITS proposing to sell software to run on the machine. After getting no response, they debated how to follow up. Neither Bill nor Paul wanted to make the phone call, so they debated for a while who would make that phone call, and both were super nervous. But eventually they came up with a compromise that Bill would call, but say he was Paul. And the founder of MITS agreed to the meeting and accepted their request to present their software. But there was just one problem. They didn't actually have any software. So after 8 long weeks, Bill and Paul finished the software and it worked. Paul and Bill closed the deal, signed the contract, and that's how they sold their first piece of software. One lesson stands out among the rest in this chapter. Although his talent for coding was remarkable, none of this would have happened if Gates hadn't pushed through his fears in his dorm room, picked up the phone, and called MITS. It was his ability to do the hard, uncomfortable thing that made this opportunity possible. So another interesting story that made an impression on me was the story of Alex shadowing the Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh for a day. One lesson Alex learned from his time with Hsieh was the power of asking for help. So while shadowing Hsieh in and out of meetings and through a company-wide presentation, Alex noticed that Zappos employees throwing him a few jealous looks, and one approached him eventually to say that he'd worked at Zappos for years and dreamed of shadowing the boss. And he was curious as to how Alex got so lucky and got to do that. So later that day, while thanking Hsieh for his time, Alex asked the CEO why he hadn't let his employees shadow him sometimes. And Hsieh was confused, as he said no one ever asked him that before. So this was a funny but, a very valuable lesson. Oftentimes we wonder how people got to network with so many people, or how they got a certain successful person to be their mentor, just to realize that they've actually never had done the first step, which is simply asking them. So what Alex did was he simply asked Tony Hsieh if he could shadow him, if he could meet him and learn from him. So with that same approach, Alex goes on to interview many more influential people, including Maya Angelou, Larry David, Lady Gaga, and lastly he meets Steve Wozniak, who showed him that there are different ways to be successful in life. So he was by some distance the happiest guy Alex had met. Steve Wozniak went alongside Steve Jobs as the co-founder of Apple, but unlike Jobs or Gates or Buffett, Steve Wozniak had never been seen as a business tycoon, largely because he left Apple in 1985. So when Alex did the interview with Wozniak, he seemed to genuinely love his life. And he said he was happy because he felt like he was living life on his own terms and doing what he wants to do, and not what society dictates is the right thing. So for example, early on in Apple's story, Wozniak was offered a spot in the executive team, but the last thing he wanted to do was to manage staff or deal with internal politics. So he told Jobs he wanted to be a simple engineer, and this is something he already knew he loved and was happy to continue doing so. And maybe society says that you should reach the highest position possible, to be the CEO, to be the most powerful. But is that really what will make you the happiest? Is what Wozniak asked Alex. And this was such an inspirational message to listen to your own heart and not to be pressured by society's gazillion norms. Success, I think, should be determined by you, where you feel the happiest and achieved, and not by society's standard. So these were just a few interviews and lessons Alex learned from those interviews and from interacting with these people. So if you're interested in learning more, you can definitely read the whole book, but these are the lessons that really stood out to me. Alex wanted me to dream bigger than I can ever imagine. I would never think that I'd be able to even talk to these people on the phone, and I'd never even dared to dream this big. But a 19-year-old pulled this off because he believed he can, and he believed in his mission. So anything is possible, my dears. Hope you like this episode, and I will see you very soon with a different book. Bye.